So, hi everyone. My name is Rav. I'm one of the program coordinators with DHF for the Hope Connects program. And this is our fourth annual University Diabetes Club conference called Don't Sugarcoat It. We started doing this in 2021 to collaborate with university clubs and other students to kind of just, talk about all the fun things associated with diabetes. And this year, the theme is Connect with Tech. And so we have some lovely speakers, and we're going to have a really good chat tonight. So using the chat feature, I want everybody to introduce themselves and to share one emoji that describes their November so far. So I will do mine verbally. Obviously, with it being Diabetes Awareness Month, I would say probably either the dark blue or the light blue heart. But on maybe like a more personal level, maybe just like the lone balloon, because apparently everybody has a birthday in November in my circle. And I've been invited to a lot of kids' birthday parties this month, which, I mean, I'm kind of conflicted on it. Kids' birthdays parties aren't my jam, but that's fine. Also, I would love to fill up my house with balloons, like in the movie Up, and just dip right now.
Me. Yeah, I think and guys, once again, please feel free to use the chat. Someone started off in the chat as well. Oh, lovely. But yeah, mine is probably gonna be like apart from the blue hearts as well. Um, there's this one emoji was just like to the eyes, just like the blank stare, but like with the hand over the mouth. So I don't know why. It feels like I don't have anything to say. I'm waiting for something. November so far has been kind of upsy, down, up and down, etc. So yeah,
I'd be like that.
yeah, that's where I'm at. I guess.
I just put mine in the chat. So that's the screaming face. I'm Jeannie, by the way. My November is just like kind of a breaking point, I guess, because it makes me realize how fast time has gone and that there's 1 month left until this semester is over. And I just feel like maybe a lot of the clubs have started late. I feel like we just started doing clubs and school is already almost over. And it's just very shocking.
Yeah, like I feel really bad. I wish, being out of school myself, not to brag, I wish I could just give everyone a moment of time where like time doesn't matter. You can do whatever you need. But unfortunately, I lack those powers. But more power to everyone for just, doing their best in this very crazy, crazy time. So Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And to help you learn, respect, reflect, and connect with the territory you live on, I encourage everyone to visit native-land.ca. So next, I'm going to pass it off to our beautiful, our wonderful, our iconic hosts for the evening. So I'll let them take it away and introduce themselves.
Overwhelmed, flattered, all of the above. Hi everyone, my name is Tasvia. I am in my fourth year at the U of T Scarborough. And a co-president of the Diabetes Awareness Society. My co-pres Tanya should be here as well today, but yeah, I'll be one of your hosts, and I'll pass it off to our next iconic host.
Hi, my name is Xia. So I'm also your other co-host today. I'm a representative of the McMaster Diabetes Association, and I'm currently in my second year studying at McMaster. Something interesting about me is that I have Moody. So if anyone else has that, feel free to reach out. I'll introduce a bit on our agenda for today. First, we'll start off with a little 411 on diabetes. So that's a bit of the extra information for people who might need some. And then for our first speaker, we'll have Tasvia, our awesome co-host. She'll talk a bit on her pump. And then afterwards, we'll have Heather Cadigan. She will talk about a bit of her MDI chat. And then we have the Daniel Moshe, who will speak about the IAPS, which is a little looping program, as I'm told. And then afterwards, we'll talk about environmental impact with Cristiano da Silva. Yeah. And lastly, but not least, we'll have Rav Samra talking about the affordability of diabetes management in Canada. Afterwards, you can ask your questions in the chat, and then we'll have our answers. And then for conclusion, we'll have a bit of talking about what's the next steps for the Diabetes Hope Foundation. And afterwards, we will have an awesome exit poll.
Okay, so I'm going to be giving a little bit of a rundown on diabetes. As you know, like most of us, we know that there's two main types, type 1 and type 2. However, as you may not know, there's actually more than two. With more research, with other people's experiences, there's been more light being shined on, for example, LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. There's MODY, which is maturity onset diabetes of the young. There's also gestational diabetes, prediabetes, neonatal, steroid-induced, cystic fibrosis-induced, and many more. However, there is a focus today and with DHF on type 1 diabetes. So just, kind of a disclaimer, if most of our experiences today, and as we discuss more about diabetes tech, are going to be pulled from T1D related experiences. There's many ways to monitor blood sugar levels. For example, the glucometer, so it's a little meter type thing that many of you have maybe seen before. But there's also the continuous glucose monitor, which now and more is in the news. That is also called a CGM.
Caspia, would you like to speak a bit of your pump? That would be awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to start off our discussion on diabetes tech, I was asked to share some of my experiences being on an insulin pump. First, I guess, I can show my insulin pump. Disclaimer, shocking. It's quite scratched and banged up. I don't know if you can see it. This is what it looks like. You can see years of use. You can see active insulin, empty spaces for BG because I haven't. Yes, thanks. And then the time, how much insulin I have left, and the battery icon. So an insulin pump is basically a medical device that allows you to deliver 24/7 flow of insulin into your body. And it's done through a site attached to your skin and a small catheter. So how it works is 680. I'm on the 780, so that's another little tidbit for you. But yeah, so there's two kind of flows of insulin. I'll say it pumps insulin through a basal, which is a continuous rate based on kind of my body's response throughout the day. I'll have a certain rate from 12 a.m. to 9 a.m., et cetera, et cetera. But also it pumps insulin whenever I'm taking a bolus, which is, for example, whenever I eat. You may biology kids know whenever you eat, it's called and swallow, it's called a bolus. So similar concept. And then also when my sugar is high and I take corrections for it, that's when it also kind of pumps insulin. Obviously, I have to do the calculations, but it's made my life a lot easier, I will say. So my journey with the insulin pump started when I was 6 years old, I believe. I remember going into grade 1, I think a day in February or something like that, and then doing an actual show and tell pres with my pump. So I took it out, showed everyone. I was like, guys, this is my pump. I'm so excited because I was on MDI prior to that. But it was a big change, so I was super excited. And I started off with a brand many have forgotten, I feel like. It was the Animus pump. But for those who know. But then around 2017 or 18, when it kind of closed down, it sold off to Medtronic. I've been on the Medtronic ever since. And now, once again, I'm on the 780G version of it. So yeah, that's pretty much, not pretty much, that's very base, high level, what my journey has been like. I'll talk about like some challenges I face, but also some of the more benefits, kind of ended on a more positive note. I'll say that some of the challenges I used to face at first was just the bulk of it, just like this extra kind of thing to carry. Um, 6 years old, I was like half my size, and this thing was probably double how it feels now. So it's always a question of, even when I was like going out to brown parties or stuff like that, where do I put it? Where do I like, how do I not show it? Because people would be nosy and be like, is that a camera? Is that a phone? What phone has wires? Stuff like that. But it's definitely gotten easier. A lot more people know about the pump now, so I'll say that's a plus. Another thing I still face to this day, I'll say, is airport security. Super annoying. Because I recently traveled, and obviously the insulin pump, it can't, my one at least, it can't go through the x-ray, the body scanner. And so I'll usually have to have my doctor's note on me, and that says she can't go through it and she has to have it attached to her body. And so I usually ask for a pat down, which takes more time. You think I've gotten used to it, but I don't think that I ever will. If someone has, then great, but not me, not yet. So that's a few of the challenges, I'll say. Some of the benefits, though, I will say, is improved blood glucose control overall. My A1Cs, which is kind of like an average, a 3-month average, used to be much higher. Now I'd say I have much more flexibility, much more discipline. That has allowed me to get a better grasp of my BGs. I'd also say, the flexibility really, really does come handy with like food. If I've eaten too much, then like, the insulin kind of like balances out. I'll eat more. I just take more insulin. Temporary basal, that's something where you can kind of cut down on how much basal is going into you like consistently. And so when I'm exercising, or, for example, it's that time of the month or something like that, your body hormones, things can go RE, like with the temperature as well. That's one of the factors that affects your blood glucose levels. So I think temporary basal is super helpful on that. And yeah, it's quick. There's new versions. Site changes aren't as painful with new tech. And once again, there's like also downloadable data now for my pump team. So I think that's just some of the challenges and benefits that I wanted to share with everyone. With all diabetes tech, there's pros and cons. There's things that people are more comfortable with than not. I was on MDI. I love being on the pump and not having to take injections, but not everyone will be, and that's fine. But yeah, that was just some of my experiences. I'd love to have like any questions, or if anyone has any other experiences, they're on the insulin pump as well, then please feel free to share. But yeah, that's about it for me.
Tasvi, I have a quick question because I'm also on a Medtronic system, not sponsored. How long is your tubing?
Mine is 23 inches. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know what happened. There was some type of shortage.
Yes.
And so I have the 43-inch right now, and it's like a magician with a scarf that just like it keeps on giving, and it's like a pet. So do you have any funny stories about being caught indoors or cabinets?
Yeah, I actually had that as one of the challenges, but I was like, you know what? Like I've already named 3, maybe like it's pushing people. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, definitely. My mom, she's type 1 diabetic as well, and she got caught in the shortage. I'd say like those with diabetes, regardless of whether you're on an insulin pump or not, a lot of like forward thinking is required. So unfortunately, that shortage lasted way longer with the 23-inch. But even with the 23-inch, like my shorter tubing, I have like long rods in as like the handles for my cupboards in my kitchen. And I cannot tell you how many times I'll like, it's literally a scene from like those Bollywood movies where I'll like walk away and I'll feel something pulling, and it's no one. It's those rods and it's my tubing. So I literally, you think it's cinematic, you think it's once or twice. No, it's far more often. It's very annoying, but you just kind of like gotta stuff it into, your pocket or kind of wrap it around and then just, have 2 seconds of like, again.
Yeah.
Then kind of move on. So that's me. Yeah, how are you finding the 43 inch?
I kind of just joke that I wish I had like it just kind of feels like an IV at this point. Like sometimes like I don't like am I getting the insulin I need? Like I just hold my pump around like a phone looking for a signal and I'm like is this helping? I don't know. Um but like my biggest challenge with a pump is I somehow always manage to wake up on it,
Oh,
kind of like Princess in the Pea.
yeah.
So like my sleep is always just disrupted. I'm like, I don't know how the pump is flying out of my bra or out of a pocket, but it's just always beside me.
Mhm.
Which isn't, I mean, like for a safety perspective, great, right? My insulin
Yeah.
pump, it's on, it's working. But on
Mhm.
the other hand, I like sleeping alone,
I
not
know.
next to my pump.
I know. Not on it, not with it. Safe distance, healthy distance, but it's very clingy, I'll say. So, yeah. I've kind of gotten used to it, but I get it. That's the reality, isn't it? You've always got like a partner with
Yeah.
you, whether you want it or not. But yeah. Chanel, I see you have a hand up. I have a question.
Sorry about that. Hi, 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 hi. Glad to hear from my president represent UTSC. So I had a question regarding something that you mentioned with the calculations when it actually came to like, getting used to the pump and all that. What was that like? Because I know for a fact that I struggle with math, but when
Mhm.
it comes to like having to constantly like monitor the calculations plus worrying about your health, I can only imagine that like causes a little bit of stress sometimes. So what was that like?
Yeah, so at first, I was 6 years old. I was not at the level where I was doing the math like for myself or my pump constantly. I think my mom was my biggest. So she actually got diagnosed way after I did. She was diagnosed in her 30s with type 1. Interesting story. But even before that, when I was first diagnosed, even to like till today, if I need some help, then I'll go to my pump team, but I'll also go to my mom. So she used to do the calculations for me. And then so like labeling everything, having the, how to calculate carbs for diabetics, how to, we focus more on carbs than calories. And so, yeah, no, the diabetes, yeah, now I do, I'll say. But at first, my mom used to like weigh everything, measure, calculate, and then label when I used to go to school, etc., outside. And then at one point when I could, like, I think 10, 12, kind of middle school. Then I took that on more to myself. Now it's just like Asta said, like the diabetes brain, the intuition to kind of vibe check those carbs. I'm having a sandwich, bread, 16, 16, 32. Like I'll just say those out loud and those who know, but it's like they can be off, but by how many grams are they gonna be off? We're just kind of on that like all the time. So when you're eating out, yeah, you gotta really be more on it and be prepared for the consequences. But those calculations do come with time. At first, they're obviously difficult. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Asta.
Hey, I'm curious about looping because I'm near the end of my like 5-year ADP and I get to choose another pump. And I've been with Medtronic for a while and I know like Tandem is also big on looping. I know Omnipod, there's like a new one coming out. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, and I know not everyone's like qualified. Maybe if there's other people with other pumps and they have anything to add. Yeah, any experience with looping?
Do you mind if I cut in? Because
Please do. I was gonna
I've used
also.
multiple closed
Yeah.
loop systems.
Mhm.
So there's a few different options, and it depends on how involved you want to be within your process. I use something called Trio, which is a do-it-yourself looping system. It's more aggressive than other looping systems, and I will be talking about it today. But out of Tandem and Omnipod, I would suggest waiting for the Omnipod. I like the algorithms that it's using, but if you want to be more involved with your diabetes care and be able to like create a system where you don't even need to dose carbs and you can just eat and it'll do everything for you, that's going to be on the do-it-yourself side. And that would mean maybe picking a pump that's not a closed loop pump, but is compatible with do-it-yourself systems. Like I'll leave if you have questions later during my segment, I will definitely like be ready to tell you more about Loop and I guess what its capabilities are and like give you a better sense of what you might want to pursue.
Sounds great. I jumped ahead. Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Heather. I'm in my fourth year at Trent University taking Indigenous Studies as my major in the teacher education stream right now. I've had diabetes for 9 years this October, and I'm currently on MDI, so multiple daily injections. So when I first started off, that's what I was on. I briefly tried the Omnipod for 8 or 9 months in grade 10, but it wasn't for me, so I went back to MDI, and I've been having a great time with it. So just to give a little bit of an overview of what MDI is, um, I I did have a picture. It looks like, okay, I can't attach a picture in the chat of my MDI pen, but I don't have it on me right now. But it's basically just a little needle with like a 2 to 4 millimeter um needle attached to the pen, and you can give around 4 to 5 injections daily with that, and that's with the short acting insulin. And then I also give myself long acting insulin at night. Some people do it in the mornings, and so for that, I use Tresiba. So I really like MDI. I feel like I have a lot of freedom with it. I know when I was on the Omnipod, one of the things that I wasn't a big fan of was carrying around a lot of extra stuff when I went everywhere. I live in a pretty rural area, so anytime that I'm leaving to go to school or the mall or even grocery shopping, I'm driving like 45 minutes away, so I can't really just like leave the house and hope that nothing goes wrong. It was like I always had to carry an extra pump, extra cartridge, extra everything, and it just got really heavy to carry around when when you're in high school, and you don't necessarily want too much stuff on you at the time. So I just went back because I found that if you needed to carry around an extra cartridge or extra needles, they weigh barely nothing, and they were really easy to put in like the front of my backpack or my pocket or anywhere like that. So that's still one of the things in university that I do enjoy, going to class and just being able to put some stuff in my backpack and only having to take one bag with me. I really appreciate that aspect of it. And there are definitely some challenges as well. I think that one of them that I really struggled with when I was first diagnosed was giving insulin in public. Just because at that point I was kind of ashamed of having diabetes, which I gradually got past the first year and realized, yeah, it is okay, and this is something that I have to do every day. But I would be so hypersensitive to if anyone looked at me differently or noticed it, because people don't really know what you are doing. So, some people will ask, some people won't say anything, but I never really knew how to approach that at first. Now I'm definitely much better with that. If someone asks a question, I'm pretty open about it. Any looks are pretty easy to ignore, and I don't find that I get too many of them at all anymore, but I do find it sometimes difficult if I have a high blood sugar in class or something and I need to give insulin. I find it is a little bit more inaccessible than I think having a pump would be. Maybe being able to just pull it out of your pocket and control it, I guess with the remote or the pump itself, but instead of having to roll up your sleeve if it's the winter, or maybe I'll be wearing an outfit that's kind of inaccessible for giving a needle in, and then having to go to the washroom, come back for giving insulin. But that's just the main one I think that has been a challenge. But other than that, for blood sugar management, I found that I've been better on MDI. I know a lot of times from some people in the diabetes community, I'll get, oh, why are you still on MDI? Like, you got to be on a pump, and kind of that that kind of viewpoint, but I think it's really important for other people to know that it is okay to be on MDI after your diagnosis, if that's what works for you, because what works for people is different for everybody. And I've honestly found so much more control on MDI myself. So I'm definitely open to going back on a pump. I feel like I have heard some really cool stuff about some new Omnipod tech that's coming out. And same with Tandem that I heard. That sounds really interesting. But um, for now, I think I'll stay on injections. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to share. Yeah.
Heather, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So do you like when you're like driving or you're like using public transit, how do you kind of navigate that with MDI?
Yeah, so that's a little bit more difficult. I'm lucky that I commute to university with my younger sister, so we share a car, and so we try to schedule our classes around the same time. So even though it can be like really inconvenient some days, like we can be there for like 10 hours, even if we have class for like 3 hours and the other person is there working in class. Um, it's nice because if I'm having a low, I can just be like, "Hey, Siobhan, can you drive?" And then she can take over and we're good to go. But if there are days, like during the summer when I work full time at Trent and I'm having a bad morning where I'm having a low and I might not be able to go because I have to wait for it to come up above 5, then I found it pretty my workplace is pretty understanding, so I've been able to just Teams them and say, hey, I'm having a low right now and I can't make it in. I'm lucky that my sugar is usually a little bit on the high, not high, but like on the higher side in the morning, so I haven't had to struggle with that too much. But yeah, for having lows, sometimes that does throw a wrench in it because of the distance that I have to drive. So I think it's just making sure to plan ahead, always having like snacks in the car because there's not always like gas stations super near where I am. So I usually just have like 2 boxes of granola bars in the trunk and like maybe a huge packet of rockets in the side door or something like that. But yeah.
And one more question, because it's been a while since I've used MDI. What's the benefit from taking the long-acting insulin at night versus the morning?
Hmm, that's a good one. I honestly have always taken it at night, so I haven't really
Same
questioned
here.
it, to be honest, because it's worked for me. That's a good question, though. I think they told me for the night is because better to take it before you go to bed, just because I think my sugars when I started off were higher at night than they were during the day. So I think that's why they like timed it there specifically. Although I do know that it's a 24 or I guess Tresiba's 48-hour acting insulin, but yeah, I've always just found it's easier to take it at night as well because I'm more consistent with going to bed at the same time at night, but I feel like with school and work and weekends, I like to sleep in sometimes. So you can see me getting up at like 5 a.m. to take it if I'm not going to work that day. But yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, cool. No, I just wanted to like ask if you could kind of talk about how you kind of deal with anyone who, does pressurize you into, or not into, but they start going like, oh, why aren't you on a pump? Because, for me, like when I was first on MDI and then, the pump came and now so many other technologies come, my clinic's always like, oh, do you want to try it? Oh, like there's this concept of kind of graduation almost.
Yeah.
But that's kind of pushed on to, I feel like, people who are on MDI or even like with the pump, what's next. But can you just talk a little bit more about, how you've kind of responded to other people who've done that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that can be a difficult thing too, because a lot of times it is approached with like, what? You're on MDI? Oh, why? Why is that? Kind of that little bit of judgment. So, usually I just take the time to explain, if they have it. I'm just like, oh, like, this is what works for me. And sometimes I drop a really good A1C that I've had just to be like, there. But sometimes it's just taking the time, I guess, to explain to them why. So I'll usually just say a couple of things like, my blood sugars, I find it easier to manage and it is easier to carry around and just some of those simple things. Yeah, there.
Thank you. I have a closing question for Heather, if no one else has any more questions. Okay, Heather, I remember that you mentioned you felt like a bit weird when you first started taking insulin MDI on campus. Do you have any advice you would give to other people who may be beginning university and are struggling to inject on campus or in public spaces?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. The main thing for me has just been if I'm going to like a 3-hour lecture or something, just making sure to wear an outfit that's more accessible for giving an injection in class. So I'm not necessarily like a huge fan of ripped jeans, but like if I am going to like a 3-hour lecture where I don't want to be, rolling up my whole sleeve or lifting up my shirt, then I'll just wear something with like a high rip in the jeans so that way I can just kind of give insulin under the table. Or just like right beside my laptop because I feel like that is just so easy, just makes it so much easier for giving insulin and it's so stress-free too because I feel like nobody notices that. Um, I think that would be my biggest tip. And then my second tip, um, maybe for guys that don't have jeans with rips that are super high up on the leg, um, maybe just taking note of where the washrooms are because I feel like in some buildings there's like 3 washrooms. So I would always just kind of make a mental note of where the closest one was. So that way I could um, know if I had to go out of a lecture quick to give insulin, where it was so I wouldn't have to miss a lot of lecture time. Getting notes from other people can sometimes be unreliable depending on, who you know in the classes. So I feel like I didn't really want to miss class a lot. So just making sure I knew where the closest washroom was would be the second best tip for me.
Thank you so much. Those are very good tips. I never thought of those.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next, we have Daniel Moultrie. If you would like to talk about IAPS.
Sure, I actually have some slides. Would I be able to share my screen?
Yeah, go for
I
it.
believe so.
Yep.
Okay, so my name is Daniel. I graduated from Queen's last year, and while I'm applying to med school, I'm working as a biotechnology investment analyst. So it's my job to keep up on the cutting edge of biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, like, phase 2, phase 3 trials. So my whole game is figuring out what technology actually works and what companies are going to grow. So I have been keeping an eye on Tandem, Omnipod 5, and I use something called Trio. Yeah, so Trio is an open source automated insulin delivery system. And as far as the hardware side of it, I use an Omnipod Eros, which is the one before the dash. I use a Dexcom G6 and I use my smartphone, so no PDM needed, which is a huge bonus because I know a lot of people have been waiting for that Omnipod Dash app to drop for many years, but for years now, a lot of closed loop systems have been running off of smartphones. What makes this looping system so interesting is that it's leagues ahead of what is currently FDA approved. So things take time for the FDA to get approved. Everything gets approved in the US first, and then Canada always lags behind. But even the US lags behind open source software. Now, this was made by other diabetics like us who just did not want to wait for companies and for FDA approval. So they did safety testing by themselves, having over 10,000 users submitted data throughout the evolution of different looping software. It started off with something called OpenAPS, which was running off of little Raspberry Pis into Medtronic pumps. And it's progressed into Loop, which is basically something that just adjusts your basal using an algorithm. And now we have hit Android APS and Trio. And what makes Trio unique is the capability to do two things: super micro bolusing and unannounced meals and dynamic factors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these features because they are absolutely fascinating and they take a lot of the thinking out of diabetes once you get everything set up. Just a quick warning, this is a DIY open source community project. It hasn't been involved by a regulatory agency, and what I'm saying is not advice, nor will I be telling you how to build the app. I will just be sharing my experience and what it does. That is legal jargon. So super micro bolusing is basically breaking up your boluses into very small pieces that are dosed according to spikes and drops in blood sugar. What that means is you can eat something and the system can detect it without you entering carbs and deliver little bursts of like half a unit of insulin to slow the spike of a blood sugar and bring you down, and then taper off that bolusing as you're going low. So if people are really good at refining their super micro boluses, they actually don't need to log carbs at all. They can just eat and the system will account for it. Um, I think it's, for me personally, I need to enter in my carbs. It's still diabetes may vary, but you have a CGM that constantly updates information and feeds it into this algorithm, which looks at the past 2 weeks of continuous glucose monitor data to predict how your sugars will respond. So instead of taking one bolus where you kind of committed, so if you take too much, you're just going to drop, or if you take not that much, it's just going to spike. This is a continuous adjustment. So you're no longer relying on getting one guess right. It's not carb centric. It's continuous glucose monitor data centric. On the other hand, if you are known to like, if CGMs aren't really good for you and they're not like working out well for you, because sometimes they're really frustrating to deal with, especially my Dexcom, quality of data in is going to affect the outcome. So again, if you're not the type who enjoys CGMs and they don't work well for you, then this might not be a solution for you. There's a few settings that you need to get right. Like, we're used to thinking about just like carb ratios and maybe basals or and stuff like that, but there are more settings, so it is a more involved process, which can make it frustrating. You have an insulin sensitivity factor, which is basically how your body reacts to insulin, how sensitive it is, that you need to get right. You need to get your carb ratios right, your basals right, and the maximum insulin on board. This is all frustrating to figure out. It takes time, so it's something that you should. It's a process rather than just something that you can build and expect it to work. So while it has the capability to do a lot for you, it also requires a lot of learning. So reading the docs that they put out, and they have these things called Loop and Learn, is essential. And no one will tell you to watch these things or learn these things when you build looping apps, but you need to be very involved. I stress this because any one setting that's kind of off could affect your sugars for a very long time, and you might not even know why. The next thing is dynamic ISF. I don't know if you guys have this or if anyone on a pump has maybe put their pump in the same spot for too long, but sometimes you become insulin resistant at sites, and sometimes your arms compared to your stomach might have different insulin absorption. So the algorithm actually accounts for this by basically understanding when you've changed your pump and then adjusting. It basically learns how sensitive you are at the one site. So it'll automatically adjust all your carb ratios, basals, everything, so that at your new site, whether you're more sensitive or less sensitive, it'll fine tune it, which is pretty awesome, because if you're like stressed or you're sick, it can figure that out. If you're exercising and you become more sensitive all of a sudden, it'll account for that. And it'll account for circadian rhythms, because right now most people are given a correction factor of some value, like 1 unit for every 4 millimoles dropping. But our sensitivity to insulin changes throughout the day, constantly. So you should ideally be mimicking the body's natural response to insulin. And that's what the system is doing. So Omnipod 5 does not have dynamic insulin sensitivity factor, and it does not have super microbolusing. None of these FDA approved pumps do, because they're not tested yet. And they do need to go to clinical trials. They do need to be tested. But I personally have a lot of safety constraints on my apps, and I trust in the safety of it, and I've been using them for years and have not had any severe hypoglycemic events. So personally, it's been working well for me, and I prefer having the option to be very aggressive with my looping system. It also adjusts your carb ratios automatically, which is quite cool, because I can't tell you how frustrating it is, 1 week that, I'm on like a regular pump or MDI, that my carb ratios are working great, and then all of a sudden, like the same ratios that I've used for months just don't work, and I'm back in this whole hell of figuring out what my ratios or what my basals have to be, talking to my endo. It also adjusts your basal, depending on whether you're low. So if you're going low, it'll taper off your basal. If you're going high, it'll increase the basal. You have to set these limits yourself, but the algorithm will pick where it needs to be within those limits. This is mainly what Tandem, Omnipod 5, that's what they're doing. It's just adjusting basal. So if you want to basically become, like, if you want unannounced meals, like if you want to be able to eat without dosing, then Omnipod 5 or Tandem won't cut it. But if you want to prevent lows at night, let's say, Omnipod 5 and Tandem are very good at that. So basically, these novel looping systems, the DIY ones, are great at bringing back blood sugars down from highs and exercise, and then autonomous eating, while FDA approved systems are more about hypoglycemic prevention, which is a huge issue because obviously like lows present the most acute threat to our health. So I'm not trying to knock Omnipod 5 or anything else because they're less involved and they're more plug and play. And this requires a lot of work. So again, there's a few things you should do if you ever do want to build something. I'd recommend starting off with Loop, which is more similar to Omnipod 5 and Tandem to get familiar with some of the settings like insulin sensitivity. Additionally, read all the docs, watch Teresa Hastings and Magnus Rein's Loop and Learns, join the Facebook group, and also before you turn on any of the cool features, take some time for your algorithm to actually learn about your sugars. I guess that's my conclusion on. I guess that's more of the technical side of things. As far as personal challenges, I just wanted to quickly mention that it's very easy to miss some settings or not understand how things work because it's complex algorithms. Any one wrong setting can mess you up for a very long time. Personally, I have lots of trouble with Dexcom, and then all the other stuff that comes with wearing a CGM and pump is applied. Some of the benefits are that I don't really need to count carbs, which is pretty cool. I also don't go low at night anymore, and when I go low, I don't treat. It corrects automatically without me treating, which I kind of do miss eating candy, so sometimes I'll have something, but it's quite fascinating. And if you're predicting low, there's all sorts of other profiles you can set, or you can set profiles when you're exercising. The other benefit is I only carry my phone on me in terms of devices, no PDM necessary. And the app shows me all sorts of statistics about my time and range, and it uploads automatically to Night Scout or Tidepool or whatever sharing app you use for your clinic. So it's adjustment. And if you, let's say, if you're young and your parents are managing this for you, you can also dose insulin like remote control. So your parents can dose it from their phone, or like adjust your basal to prevent you from going low on their phone if you're like a kid. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
I actually had a question about, so with Tandem, they have the Control IQ, which is essentially like a detection for when blood sugar is going low, when it's going too high, and then it changes either your basal rate or does a correction dose. So is this like, from what I've seen in how you're describing it, it's like a much more refined version of that process?
Yes, definitely. It's basically comparing your responses to blood sugars for the past 2 weeks and then constantly adjusting those values.
Oh, okay. So
right? So it's a little more aggressive, and you have the possibility to set it more aggressive to bring your sugars back into range faster than an Omnipod or the Tandem would. They're gonna, by the way, like these official companies are gonna get to this point eventually too. This is the direction they're heading in, pretty much.
Yeah, FDA takes a long time to approve stuff, so.
Oh, trust me, that is my job to look at that all day. It takes forever.
Didn't they just get to like some of the pumps in Europe? Like I know it's taken a while to get over there as well, like much longer than the States. Yeah. Crazy.
Because Europe has their own approval board, which is different than the FDA with their own different set of rules. It's also a smaller market as far as companies are concerned, so it's less of a priority to sell there immediately. The US, China, that's where you want to be. That's where they try to sell the fastest and where they make the most money.
Very cool.
Thanks so much for your talk. It really answered a lot of the questions that I had. And I know my endo's been telling me for a while, like, oh, you should look into DIY. And I'm like, this is exactly what I think I needed to hear. But my question is about like the learning curve. And I know it's a bit of a subjective question. I know you mentioned there's like resources on this slide as well, but just from the starting point of deciding you want to use Trio to actually getting to where you're comfortable, you're not really like changing any kind of settings. How long do you think that took, or how much like attention or effort you had to kind of describe that?
Well, What I started was a little bit more Wild West. There wasn't as much documentation or a set route to follow, and I didn't have anyone guiding me. So it took me longer than it had to. I would say now the way to go about these things is join the Facebook group, read the documentation, watch the videos, and really within like a matter of weeks, you could actually fully get it down. Because now they actually tell you how to handle each situation. And everyone on the Facebook group is so friendly. You put a question in, same day it'll get answered. People will tell you how to adjust your settings and fix it. It's like having an endocrinologist at like a finger's push. So the only other downside with DIY looping is that your endo will probably have no clue what's going on. So you need to kind of be prepared to learn it all. But it's not that bad nowadays to figure it out, especially if you start off with something like loop. It's much simpler and it's a good gateway system.
And are you still able to like export data and look at trends and all of that, kind of like we do with the pumps right now?
Exactly. So yeah, so there's a few things you can use. There's a server called Night Scout you can set up. You can pay like a site like T1Pal and it'll upload it all there. But now Trio has built in compatibility with Tidepool, which is what a lot of clinics use to upload their data and see trends. Within the app, you can see trends too. It breaks down 15, 30, and then like a few months. It gives you an estimate of your A1C, and it shows you your sugars. And within Night Scout, which is the server I mentioned, if you're really so inclined, they have a function called auto tune. This is not the same as auto tune within the app, which you would see if you use Trio, and it actually uses an algorithm to tell you what adjustments you need to make to your basal and carb ratios automatically. So you don't need to do any thinking, and it just takes your data and tells you what you need to fix based on patterns.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was so cool. I'm so sorry. That was so cool. Thanks for explaining all of that. I was gonna ask, like, how do you talk about, discuss your results and the DIY and the whole process, like with your endo and the team as well, but you kind of answered that as well. Just like, because for me, I feel like I've been on the pump and not changed anything in like so long. It's just kind of like hard to imagine. How is your experience like, with stuff that really, for example, we have the dual bolus when I like pizza or like Chinese when I eat out, like that really I have to depend on that. But how do you kind of navigate those kind of situations? How does it help? All of that.
Sure. So let's say you're eating something like a burger, something heavy with like proteins and fats. You can actually enter protein and fat into the calculator. You have something called a bolus calculator. You just put in your carbs, and if you want protein and fat, and you'll take a bolus insulin with it, and then the rest of it is just up to the system, really. It would probably see, oh, like maybe I dosed too much insulin for that burger, and I'm gonna go low before because it's a slow carb absorption. So it'd probably lay off my basal. And then as my sugar rises up, it might give me some corrections to prevent a spike. And then as the carbs kick in, it would give me super micro boluses. So it kind of handles that for me if I have it set up correctly. I think the main thing and the most important thing with this whole setup is that you spend time not in a closed loop for the first few weeks, just really refining your basal so that's super accurate, your carb ratios, and having really good inputs so that the output is solid. And there's guides on how to best determine your basal and carb ratios specifically for looping systems. But once it's all set up, it does its job quite well. And you can make adjustments to the aggressiveness if you see that it's driving you low. There's a few common scenarios that have answers online and in the documents in Facebook.
Got it. All right, thank you so much for the answers. We are going to be moving to a chat on environmental impact and projects with Cristiano.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Cristiano da Silva, and I am at the University of Waterloo in nanotechnology engineering. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 years ago. So I have much less time experience than most people with diabetes, especially considering it was a bit of a surprise for me. So a bit of background on my story. So I went on a school camping trip and then I caught COVID, and that COVID spread. So it triggered an autoimmune response, and that's how I got diabetes. And I was actually very in denial about if that's what actually happened. But then I spoke with someone who, like, he was like the director of like the Long COVID Institute, and he said there's been many reported cases of COVID triggering diabetes. And I thought that was very interesting. So that's a bit about how I got it. So since then, I've been very interested in like all things diabetes tech and also the environmental aspect of it. So specifically for me, what it was is after I was diagnosed, I was very frustrated with how much waste is coming from like diabetes treatment, but specifically for me, it was the applicators for the G6. And because those, yeah, okay, I see you, Daniel. Yeah, yeah, I see the frustration. So I was like incredibly frustrated with the fact that these applicators were something that like every single week or 10 days you would have to throw out. And it's the fact that like the size is already very difficult to throw out, but it's the fact that it's a needle, so it's biohazardous waste, so you can't technically put it in the garbage, but most people do because it doesn't fit inside the sharps containers. So there's really nowhere to put them. And at the same time, when I searched online if there were any like resources or programs where you could actually throw them out, I didn't find anything from Dexcom. All I saw was that we have no available resources to throw them out. But what I did see was people on Reddit complaining that they were making a lot of waste. So I knew that this was like a very big problem that was a lot of people were dealing with. And so, you know, diabetes is increasing in the amount of people that are actually diagnosed. But for CGM usage, there's more type 2 diabetics that are using it as well. And over someone's lifespan, that's producing a lot of waste. So I think I did the math a while ago, and it winds up to being like a couple, what is it, like 5 kilograms per person per year just from these applicators alone. And there's like 300,000 diabetics. So it's a lot of waste that you're producing. Um, so I was really frustrated with this, and it was about the time when I was applying to university scholarships, and I found this program called Rise. And so basically, I had to make a project and then submit my application for it using whatever the project was. So I decided to like kind of link my engineering passion with this environmentalism and diabetes, and I wanted to redesign the glucose, the CGM applicator, so that it would have like a disposable component and a reusable button, so I could actually throw out the needle part but continue reusing the outside. So I sort of went about, I taught myself how to 3D model, and that was like a whole venture to try and get that to work. And I actually ended up winning the scholarship, which was amazing because, thank you. It was amazing because it actually gave me like, it really validated that idea that like if you come up with a design, you can actually get recognition behind it, but more so that if you find a problem that's something you really, really care about, there's actually like a reason for pursuing it. And not even if I didn't get success in that moment, like it was still the validation of taking something from an idea that really frustrated me to actually making something that I was really happy with. So I've been able to do like a lot of different things related to that project specifically. And along the way, I've like heard from other people with diabetes and their experience. And it's been really nice hearing the validation from the fact that other people are, even if it's not frustrated about the environmental aspect, they're just frustrated about the condition in general and like certain parts of it. And you know, as Daniel, what I kind of saw that you were talking about is some people are frustrated with the fact that it's a lot of work that it actually takes to do the treatment. So, like, tech makes people's lives easier in that sense, and that's kind of why we go through with it. So, after that scholarship, I got the chance to speak at the Rhodes House in Oxford, at Oxford University. And there it was like essentially like a summit where it was like a bunch of people from different countries who also submitted their projects. And there I like presented this thing that I created, more so just talking about like the diabetes aspect and like just trying to create awareness for diabetes amongst people who are like generally very focused on other tech issues, but or like other social issues. And diabetes generally isn't something that pops up. Type 2 sometimes, type 1 very rarely. And while I was telling my speech, actually, one thing that I really brought me up to like emotional, uh, really made me feel validated was after I told my speech, some guy that was in the crowd, he's from Germany, he came up to me and he said that he had type 1 diabetes, but he'd never told anyone because where he's from in Germany, there's so much shame and guilt about it. And so he felt like very embarrassed about it. But hearing my speech was like something that kind of helped him get over that guilt a little. And Heather, I think you were talking a bit about this, where at first you were feeling like really embarrassed about having the condition, and it was kind of like there's guilt about it. But when people talk about it, that kind of brings light to kind of like shared experiences, and it's just validating hearing people other talk about it. Sorry, I'm talking very quickly. I gotta slow down. But yeah, so I was like very interested in that idea where it's like if you can share your story with other people, then it'll make kind of those experiences seem more common, and it'll help others be able to talk about that. So that's sort of been like the environmental aspect of it and the social part of it. But then from like more of a techie perspective, I've been trying to like continue working on things related to it in like a similar sense. So when I saw this meeting, I noticed that there wasn't one for Waterloo. And so I'll consider myself like the unofficial person representing Waterloo here because I'm part of a glucose control team here. And essentially what they're trying to do is use like some of those time stamps and like machine learning to understand people's data that they actually have in the CGM. It's very similar, Daniel, to what you were talking about with the closed looping. Um, and it's actually part of this app. So there's this app called Gluru, and it's like actually really cool. I can't even lie because you just take a photo of what you're eating and it scans how many carbs, the fat, the protein, like it tells you all the nutritional value just from a photo. And I've used it a couple times and it has been very accurate. So I will say, like, if you ever notice that it's very difficult to track carbs sometime, I do recommend this app. But that's also, like Daniel said, no legal advice. That's out of my control. I just noticed that it worked for me a bit and I thought it might be helpful. I think it's on iOS. I know it's on the App Store as well. Yeah, no worries. So I've been using that, and this program is like in partnership with the person that created that app. And I think the goal behind what some of the team is doing is they're trying to create a research paper so that they can sort of publish their findings behind like individualizing data for people's glucose monitoring. Because we have these like really big systems that take averages of what people's blood sugars are, but the problem is it's so variable and like so like depending on what your individual patterns are or your habits, like it can fluctuate so much. So let's see. Do I have a note about this? Okay, yeah. I think for me specifically, one thing I'm kind of interested about is seeing how like fat actually impacts what your diet is because like I've noticed if I've had like a very fatty, maybe a pizza meat, like a very oily, greasy meal, like a lot of slices of pizza, you have that like delay in what your digestion is for the first bit. So it might drop and then rise a lot. Daniel, I actually am curious about this after because I want to see if it accounts for fat. But I've noticed that very few resources actually talk about like the impact of how you can calculate what fat is. And so I've noticed for me, I've had to like adjust it so that it's maybe plus 20% of whatever my carb ratio is. And then I'm hoping that like in the future, in another world, we have the system where like either you input whatever carbs you're doing, you take a photo, it calculates it, maybe you confirm it, it delivers the dose, and then that's where that trio system comes in where it like auto corrects the other things, but maybe like it can account for some other factors. I don't know. That's sort of in my, yeah, for sure. What's up?
Very, very cool stuff, especially with the Dexcom design. Extremely fascinated, and I want to talk to you about your research later because I'm looking at some diabetes trials with Dexcom data.
Okay.
But regarding the trio thing, it actually doesn't necessarily rely on like protein and fat. Like you can input it, but if everything's working ideally, like you don't even need to log your carbs, like or
Okay.
take a picture of the meal. Like you could just handle it for you, and that's
Really?
the ideal direction that we want to go in. Is we want to simulate what a pancreas does in the body.
Mhm.
So that means not telling it the carbs, and it would react more on like blood sugar spikes and data, which would I think in order to get like truly autonomous systems like that, we would need better CGM data, but then
Yeah.
also there's a few and better algorithms, but that's going to take time. But we're heading in the right direction.
In general, I think that diabetes tech produces a lot of waste, but that's not really the biggest concern by the issue. Like, obviously, people's health and care is the most important, but I still do think that it's important that we can like consider the impact of it because it is a source of guilt for some people, and it's ideally in some way that if from like even from the source from engineering from these companies like Dexcom and Medtronic, if we can kind of limit some aspects of the environmental production. So, for example, the shipping, like the packages, are very sizable. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but for the Dexcom transmitter, it's like a tiny little chip, but then a box that's like the size of the Bible. So it's like takes up a lot of space in comparison to how much you're actually using. So there's different aspects of it that can be improved, and that's sort of what my goal has been in different senses. I'm hoping that they can either create some type of like collection system at people's hospitals, so when they go for their 3 month checkup, maybe they could bring some of that waste with them, because otherwise it's going in the garbage can, and like having needles in the garbage is sort of a area of concern. It can cause infection, but also it can be like it can be a bit of a risk to like waste management treatment as well. So that's been like the environmental aspect, and trying to connect it with some of the tech. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away.
Okay, so that's okay. You have a really cool project. I'm guessing it's finished.
I have the model I can show if anyone wants, but it didn't end up going as far as I had hoped. Well, I mean, actually no, I guess it did, but it couldn't go into actual trial because when I finished the model, then they came out with the G7 and it had a smaller form factor, and I was like, oh, I was right there. I was like so close. So in that sense, I was happy. But for the actual tech aspect of it, yeah, I guess like the project itself is sort of done, but I'm always willing to change things.
I think your idea is definitely applicable to go even further, and it's very cool to hear about it today.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I actually really loved like the selection of speakers this year. It was very kind of
For sure.
different.
Yeah.
For you though, specifically, I wanted to ask, like, while we're waiting for that kind of innovation to come out, what can we do as type 1 diabetics or people with diabetes to kind of minimize our waste and kind of impact on the environment? I like to think about like when I dispose things, I really do throw it in the garbage and I don't think
Yeah.
twice. So that's on.
So the biggest issue is just the needles, and needles going in the garbage is the concern. So that's going to be if you use a pump, it's going to be the actual like needle tip that you use to insert the insulin. If your tubing has like a needle connection. So I know for the tandem, there's the part where you have to clip in that has a needle. And then any application device that has to insert a needle. So anything essentially that you can see that's metal or has a needle is probably not going to be able to go in the garbage. Other things generally straight to the garbage. Some of the packaging, like if it's paper or certain plastics, can go in the recycling. But I'd say the biggest one is if it has a needle, try putting it in the sharps container. So like even if it doesn't seem like what would normally go in the sharps container, if it has a needle, go in the sharps container. And then for the applicators, that's still where the issue is. Like what I've tried to do is just have a box and then I bring them to when I do my appointments like every 3 months. But instead of that, you can also like this is a bit I don't recommend this because it's like might be dangerous. But if you have like pliers, you can just take out the needle and put that in the sharps container as well. That works. It does work. It's not like ideal. I don't want to encourage that because that might be a safety risk. But I'd say just in the same way that you would approach like throwing out garbage when you're at the mall or the food court and it has the individual bins, just see like, is it a piece of paper or is it plastic? Probably recycling. Everything else without a needle, that's going to be garbage. But then if it's needle or any sharps in general, that's where it's going to either go in the sharps container or straight to your hospital when you bring the bin. That's sort of how I would do the breakdown of that.
Oh, that's helpful. And also just thinking about if there's like the companies like Dexcom or Medtronic, like if they had some kind of program you could bring these kinds of supplies, kind of like they do with like the iPhone. I know like Apple,
Yeah, exactly.
that could be something that maybe you or someone else kind of pitches
Yeah,
in.
no, I've been trying. I've been asking sick kids if they can like set up a bin where you make it in the education so that parents automatically assume that the only place they can go is the hospital, because then no one's going to doubt it because it is the only place. But if you just tell parents that it has to go to the hospital, then they'll bring it for their kids and then the companies can collect it when they throw out the rest of the medical supplies. The only issue that I found with that is actually trying to get the hospitals to accept more waste because they're not really interested in that. But if I'm trying to see if somehow you can pose it as like a health and safety risk, and then maybe something could happen. But that's Hopefully, that's the goal.
I'm just going to jump in here with my financial bit. I'm going to speed run this because I want to try to wrap up by 8:30 so everyone can be cozy and go to bed. So yes, everyone, I'm Rav. I have had diabetes for a while, longer than all of you have been alive, but we can ignore that. So I was diagnosed when I was 2. In November marks my diversity. So later this month, I'll hit my 27-year mark. And my birthday happens to be in March. So thank you, Asta. If you happen to do the math, I turned 25 in 2020, which meant that I could no longer be under my parents' insurance plan, despite still being in school and in a pandemic where somehow everything and nothing were happening at the same time. So I had to pay for everything out of pocket. And as we know, there is a huge financial and emotional and environmental impact from diabetes. And yeah, we just have to put it under our belt and deal with that burden as well. So I became really interested in the financial aspect of diabetes. I did some work with T1 International. They do an out-of-pocket expenses survey every 2 years. And last year I helped them write a paper on it and provide that Canadian perspective, because a lot of people think Canadians don't have it as bad as Americans, which is like, okay, sure. But that doesn't mean it's acceptable. Despite, a lot of services here becoming more privatized, Canada is the only country here with universal healthcare, but no universal pharmacare. And as we know from experience, we still have to pay for our own insulin, our supplies, and other medications. I'm someone who happens to have low thyroid and PCOS. God really looked at me and decided to give me all the hormonal challenges. So I'm just truly blessed with this hormonal cocktail. We have a patchwork of public and private prescription coverage here, and that obviously depends on where we live, our income, and our employment. And about half of working age Canadians have employer-based private insurance, which often requires a co-payment. Give me a percentage of Canadians you think pay out of pocket for prescriptions. Just throw out a percentage. Okay, 60 to 70. It's actually 25%. So close enough with 30. It's left millions of Canadians with diabetes struggling to afford their medication because they often have to ration their supplies, which is unfair because nobody with diabetes asks for it, and we shouldn't have to choose between paying our rent and getting insulin to survive. And Canadians spend a higher percentage of total health spending on drugs than Americans do. And we actually pay the highest drug costs in the world, only behind the US and Switzerland. And I feel like that's a point I constantly have to hit home with people because, again, they just think, well, it's not as bad as the Americans. And I'm like, that shouldn't be the bar. That should not be the standard. And so as a result of that, Canadians experience a higher rate of cost-related non-adherence to medications. And as we've experienced, there's often an age cap on a lot of these coverage plans. So you have to be under 18 or under 25. The Yukon is, I think, the only place in Canada that gives you insulin for free, except for Levemir. And I don't know if anyone's been following the news. Bill C-64 was passed federally, which makes insulin, metformin, and oral contraceptives to be covered. And we're just waiting for provinces and territories to get on board. Apparently, Alberta and Quebec are not in favor of this change, but hopefully by next spring, we can see provinces get on board. Now, I don't know if by next spring they mean 2025 or 2026, but as someone who's almost 30 and has had this for way too long, the sooner the better. Some of us may be familiar with the assistive devices program, and in order to qualify, you have to be an Ontario resident and have a valid Ontario health card. And what's covered is your insulin pump. Some downside of it is that if you need a replacement pump, your medical condition has had to have changed and the pump no longer meets your needs. If the pump is worn out or no longer under the 5-year warranty and cannot be repaired at a reasonable cost. So I know that makes it very difficult for us to switch pump brands because you really get a different experience with each pump. Like I'm someone who's always been on Medtronic because that's been the easiest option with my clinic because we often butt heads over other things. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just go on a Medtronic system and just keep that kind of at ease for a little bit. And then I found out recently that the Freestyle Libre is covered by OHIP Plus, which is pretty interesting. So OHIP Plus provides more than 5,000 drug products at no cost for anyone 24 years or younger, not covered by a private plan. You don't need to enroll, you just need a health card and an eligible prescription. I don't know if anyone's really familiar with the Ontario Drug Benefit, ODB. So if anyone is, please feel free to share. And Heather brought this point up before. You have to really be respectful of other people's choices. What works for you may not work for someone else. I'm someone who was on a pump for a bit, took a break, went back on a pump, and as much of a nightmare as it is to deal with your clinic, to make all these changes and justify those changes, it's necessary in order to you kind of meet your own needs as someone with diabetes, because it's always changing depending on the month or the year. So that's kind of my financial spiel real quick. But now I'll just open it up to everyone if they have any questions. Yes. Sorry, I'm reading Cristiano's comment about like $300 USD a vial. Yeah. So I'm actually I'm not on U100 insulin, which is the common insulin. I'm on U200 because of the PCOS, I have a lot of insulin resistance. So just a fun fact, being on U200, which is double the concentration, it's about $420 a month. It's so much fun getting insurance to cover it and like getting them to understand that my needs for insulin have changed. And even when I submit an insurance claim for my sensor, they need documentation each time I submit a claim proving I have diabetes. And I'm like, shouldn't you already have this on file? Like, like I'm not gonna, like diabetes doesn't like just go away. But that's just like the great part about being an adult, I guess.
I have a question about, okay, like the expectation you should have when managing diabetes and purchasing technology for diabetes in terms of your insurance. So I know because I tried to buy some GCMs from my university under my university's health insurance, but they only cover something like 80%.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if that's the same, because you mentioned OHIP Plus, they cover like Freestyle Libre as well. Would that be 100%, or like what is usually the standard across insurance that's available to us?
I believe if it's under OHIP Plus, it's 100%. I would have to double check though, so don't take my word for it. But with my insurance plan at the moment, they cover 100% of my CGM cost up to a certain amount. I think it's like $5,000 a year. But I know like Medtronic has like a specific program that if you are from a lower income background, they're willing to kind of subsidize some of that cost. Not a lot of people know about it. And Medtronic is really good if you need like a replacement sensor. Yeah, Dexcom did limit the sensor replacements to 3. Is it within a 90-day period or?
I thought about a year, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And I thought it was ridiculous. Like if, someone has a specific issue, like for example, if you get really sweaty and it falls off and like the patch isn't really helping you, then what are you supposed to do, right? You're losing days off of something that you paid for.
Does anyone have issues with like their CGM sticking to them? I'm just curious.
I used to, but you should definitely always use an overpatch with the Dexcom. Like it also improves accuracy because pressure loads are very common with Dexcom and they can shift because of your clothing. So overpatch is the way to go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, skin tack is pretty good as well. I remember when I had the Omnipod, I had a lot of trouble with it staying on, and I always use that. It's like an alcohol wipe, but just makes your arm sticky. So that's pretty good too. Yeah, I was actually gonna ask Brad if you're taking one more question. How'd you find the process of finding insurance and navigating that with jobs after graduation? Because that's like a huge stressor on my mind right now, even for, when I'm done the Bachelor of Education, I'll be 24, I'll have that, I guess, not even a year to kind of find a job that offers the insurance for that.
I was super unprepared. And so please use me as a cautionary tale. So I went to TMU and they have insurance plans for recent graduates. So look to see if Trent has something like that. But then I was lucky enough to kind of find a job after completing like a post-grad program, and I had to wait 90 days for my insurance to kick in. But luckily it was with Sun Life. I was familiar with Sun Life, so it wasn't too much of like a learning curve for me to like use their platform, use their app, find out kind of like the ins and outs of that. It's also really important to keep all documentation that you have stating that you have diabetes, because some claims people don't understand how intricate diabetes is, or they kind of just assume that you have type 2, which is annoying and oh, so fun to deal with. And then this year I was recently laid off, which was so much fun. But Sun Life had a plan that kind of mimicked my workplace plan. The coverage is a little bit different, but I pay like a decent amount a month just to make sure that like my insulin gets covered. So with my insulin being about $420 a month, I pay about 90. So not ideal, but it's hard out here, you know? So I'll take it. I'll take the $90.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for telling me about that. Yeah, that's always interesting to hear from the career market perspective of it.
Yeah, it's the things we do.
From what I'm getting, it's pretty expensive to manage diabetes, especially since if you, like you mentioned, 25% of Canadian pay out of pocket for their health supplies. So if people are not able to like afford the diabetes management, what would you advise to be the best way forward for them?
So the most important thing to do is, I would say, start off with like the provincial programs. I'm only familiar with Ontario, unfortunately, but see if you can get like the Freestyle Libre that's covered by OHIP Plus. If you are under the age of 24, also like collect as many of your receipts and stuff as possible to see if you can submit that for taxes. Also get the disability tax credit, which I know can be super beneficial when it comes to filing taxes. Yeah, because I acknowledge that I'm in an extremely privileged position, even during the pandemic, where my parents were like, okay, well, we're not going to just let you die, because that is the reality of diabetes. Every day we work to keep ourselves alive. That they're like, yeah, we will like support you. And I'm like, thank you so much. But yeah, it's not. It's a very real question for a lot of people, but the answer is unfortunately not that great.
Yeah, I didn't imagine it to be great, but you gave some really good points. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone, it's Rav, and I'm going to go over 2 slides that we didn't get to during the actual Don't Sugarcoat It event. So let's get started with what's next with VHF. So firstly, I wanted to bring our attention to the Student Transition Planner. This wonderful resource was created by students for students, and think of it as like a one-stop shop for a bunch of wonderful information that you can have at your disposal regarding managing your diabetes as you transition from high school to, yes, post-secondary, but also into adult life. There are a lot of great pieces of information in here, such as knowing your rights at school and within the workplace regarding managing your diabetes. We go over insurance coverage and how to go about moving across province lines and how to kind of navigate that. And we also have some great downloadable resources available, such as what type of sample letter do you provide your doctor when talking about accommodations, or how to talk to your prof or TAs about managing diabetes within your class. So if you go to the Diabetes Hope Foundation website, click up top where it says Transition Resources, you'll see the Resource Hub and you'll see the Student Transition Planner. You will also see our Transition Guide, which features accommodations available across 190 schools in Canada, and it goes over kind of the nearby clinics, hospitals, in case you have to do that backup planning. And we also have Transition in the Kitchen, which is a recipe guide that we came out with a few years ago. So I highly encourage everyone to go to this webpage and look at the resources there. Nextly, we have T1 Zine, which came out earlier this in the summer, and it's kind of like this mini magazine. And the first one focused on stigma in diabetes. So 11 lovely people from the Diabetes Hope Foundation community kind of came together and, expressed their experiences with stigma. And a lot of people had wonderful and cute visual representations of it and written words about it. So you can see this online as well on the Diabetes Hope Foundation website. And we are hoping to come out with a second edition early 2025 focused on diabetes and support. So look out for communications from me regarding that. And lastly, I just wanted to plug the Hope Connects program. We are always looking for folks who want to be mentors and folks looking to be mentored. So if you have anybody in mind or you yourself want to go about the application process, once again, visit our website. And if you have any other questions or concerns, you can always email hopeconnects@diabeteshopefoundation.com. Got that at the bottom there. And lastly, just wanted to give a big shout out to everyone for contributing to this event, whether it was just suggesting ideas through email or Instagram DMs. Either way, I really appreciate it and all the work that you do to spread awareness about diabetes and ending stigma and having those fun or difficult conversations. So here we just have our website, and you can connect with us on Instagram at Diabetes Hope Foundation. And lastly, thank you to the clubs for providing lovely speakers and our hosts. So in order, we have the Diabetes Society, which is UTSC, the McMaster Diabetes Association. We have University of Ottawa's Team Diabetes, and then, of course, Diabetes Link at the University of Toronto and Toronto Metropolitan University. So please check their socials, look at what events they have going on. They're all doing wonderful things in the name of diabetes research and advocacy. And with that being said, thank you everyone